Hey photographers, welcome to the Bokeh Podcast. I'm your host, Nathan Holritz, and I'm here to help you build a sustainable photography business. That means improving your photo skills, building on your business knowledge, and honing your marketing abilities. But it also means helping you work more efficiently so you don't get burnt out in the long run. We do try to bring the show to you commercial free, so make sure to check out our sponsors, photographersedit.com and Miilu, Miilu.com. Photographer's Edit is custom photo editing for the professional photographer, and Miilu is the simplest way to create and manage timelines and shot lists for the events you're photographing. Again, photographersedit.com and Miilu.com. All right, let's get into today's episode. All right, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, we're back for another Bokeh Podcast episode. And I was saying this to Jide before we got started, but I am truly excited for this conversation today. I have with me my friend Jide. And you know what's funny, Jide, as many times as we've had conversation, I somehow don't know how to pronounce your last name. So can you share that with all of us, please?
Oh, man, it's actually easier to pronounce than my first name.
Okay.
Because it's phonetically pronounced.
It is.
So yeah, it is exactly as it's spelt is exactly as it sounds. So it's Alakija, which is Alakija.
Okay, and yeah, I wasn't sure if that J was silent or be pronounced with an H or that kind of thing. I don't know. I was probably overthinking it. Yeah. Okay, so Alakija, that's really cool. Well, it is truly a privilege to have you on the show today. We've been chatting about doing a podcast episode for some time now, and I mentioned this to you before we got started, but I have so much respect for, and ultimately, and just kind of drawn in by the energy that you exude in conversation, your presence. But not only that, and I didn't mention this to you before we got started, I'm truly taken by your photographic skills, and I've been in the industry now for about 20 years, and frankly, I'm not easily taken by photography. A lot of it just seems like the same. But you've got a certain skill set that is quite captivating. And I was particularly taken by it when I heard you speak at the Cookout Conference maybe a couple of years ago. And I was like, man, this is fascinating stuff, like to hear kind of your thought process and see the behind the scenes of what it means to capture those in-between moments. And so we're going to actually dig into that topic today. I'm excited to share that with our listeners a little bit later. Let me actually start, though, with something that we talk about quite a bit here on the Bokeh Podcast, which is brand position. So that the value proposition that your business offers to your marketplace, what is that for your company?
First of all, thank you so much for bringing me onto your podcast and for some of the very lovely things that you said. It's obviously very humbling. It's taken me aback just listening to it, and I appreciate that.
Oh, no, absolutely. And I mean, every bit of it. I mean, this is truly something that I was looking forward to. So I appreciate you making time for all of us.
Awesome. But yeah, so in terms of brand proposition from my business, I like to think of my own business, which is Alakija Studios, as one that is there to capture, or at least to tell stories and capture memories that will pretty much last a lifetime.
Okay.
One of the things that really, really is important to me is the fact that, as we live in this world, we have so many things going on in our lives, so many things happening, and they're very, very meaningful things. And I think it's so important that we have some sort of, way of sort of remembering these things because they mean something to us. My mission statement, for instance, now is bringing refinement and grace to couples and families, just by discerning and capturing meaningful moments and memories. And really the point is that it's one thing to have these moments and memories happening, but it's also important to be able to discern them so you can people don't need to worry about the fact that there is someone sort of capturing these things.
That's interesting. So you're essentially creating an environment where they can just be, which then of course enables you the freedom to be able to focus on capturing those moments.
Precisely. And kind of using my own ingenuity, imagination, and creativity, words that I put into my mission statement, to kind of bring out these things in a way that makes them pleasing to the people who want to see them.
I'm curious. I mean, and I already mentioned the significance of your personality, your persona, your presence. I can imagine that just naturally puts your clients at ease, which then, of course, sets the scene for you to be able to capture the photographs that you do. But has that always been the case? Have you always been somebody who finds it easy to interact with others? Was that something you had to learn and work on? Talk to us about that.
I definitely love being around people. I'm very curious and interested in people. As far as being easy, I wouldn't so much say that. I know a lot of people would say, "Oh, I'm not a shy person," but I always feel shy in most new environments. But the thing, though, I find is if I sort of find that the energy that I'm around is one that's very welcoming and one that I quite enjoy, and one that's also accepting of my own sort of personality, I feel very sort of at ease when I have to sort of make my way into new environments. And so far, I've been quite blessed with the fact that some of the people I've been around in this industry have been such great people that it just makes it easier each time. You learn something the first time and you take it to the next time and to the next time. So yeah, it's so I won't so much say it's something that's easy. It's definitely something learned. Particularly when I moved to the US, that was the first challenge, sort of learning different cultures and adapting my own flair and style with a different environment. Trust me, I was offending a lot of people when I first moved over here. With my sarcasm, it's a very, very different place.
Yeah, no question. Yeah. Oh man, I love sarcasm, but you're right. I mean, you have to kind of feel the vibe first before you go there with some people, and yeah, you can get yourself in trouble. I speak for myself. I can get myself in trouble if I'm not careful.
Right.
But this is actually a great segue to my next question, which has to do with customer experience. I mean, is there something in particular that you have learned over the years? We're close to 15 years or so in business now. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So something that you learned during that time frame that has been particularly impactful, that was a kind of an aha moment for you when it comes to delivering a great experience for your clients?
A lot of people would say the same thing whenever you speak to them about customer experience of their business, but it's so true. Listening is a very big thing that is so important. And what I mean by listening, and I'm probably going to say that quite a lot of times in this interview, is that you want to listen. Like, it's so easy as a creative to want to create for yourself, but the moment someone is giving you money to deliver some sort of service to them, you have to listen to what's important to them. You can't sort of put your own biases over theirs as well. Yeah. So you'll find that just by listening and making sure you understand what values your customers hold highly, and putting that at the forefront of everything that you're delivering will push you and take you a long way. Your customers are going to rave about you just because of that. They're going to want to do more with you just because of that. So that for me is the biggest, I would say, gem I have learned, should I say, in everything that I have done so far with my business.
Well, I think it's a very common cultural thing right now in the US anyway, to be just kind of generally outspoken, right? We're constantly talking, whether it's literally via our mouths or we're doing it virtually via Instagram or Facebook or via email. We're constantly talking. And the idea that we have to sit and be quiet and just pay attention and give genuine focus to a conversation, it's not the norm. And anytime I've made a concerted effort to bring that kind of environment to a conversation, the response that I get is quite incredible, because people aren't used to having that type of an experience and conversation. So what you're talking about is you kind of suggested, it's a bit cliche that a lot of people say this, but I don't think that we can talk about it or emphasize it enough. And that is the significance of actually paying attention, not projecting onto the conversation, making assumptions. We can just get ourselves in all kinds of trouble with assumptions, especially in any kind of relationship, really, certainly professional relationships. And
that's correct.
So making room for conversation to be had, and as you pointed out, making sure that we truly understand what the other person is talking about, their perspective, what they're looking for, their values. Man, that's such an important concept. I'm really glad that you highlight that.
Yeah, totally. Man, you say it so well. I'm just like do you know what? You should just interview yourself sometime.
No way. That'd be a boring interview.
You'd be surprised.
Let me actually talk to you about time, though, because I know you've got your hands full. You do a lot. You travel. You're certainly, obviously, a photographer. You're an ambassador for Nikon now, which is really exciting. We'll talk about that in just a second. But you also are part of a company that sells African art, which is a fascinating concept and topic in and of itself. Like, we could probably go down that road quite a ways. But how do you balance all that you're doing with just having mental, psychological space, and then, of course, time for the important people in your life?
I think it's so important that you make time for the important things. And I've learned this the hard way, because I'm the kind of person who wants to be involved in every single thing that's happening around me. I want to, I get easily excited about little things. And I find that whenever I'm sort of involved in too many things, I deliver very, very poor results as a result. But once you have really good balance, so say, for instance, now, something I've discovered is, say, I'm working on a particular project that's taking so much time out of me. It's usually lovely. You normally enjoy the project at the beginning. And then as you go on, it starts to become dull. It starts to become, strenuous. I find that when you sort of take some time out, and you mark time for everything that you're going to be doing. So you're saying, okay, I'm going to start working on this project from this time. I'm going to finish everything I do on this project at this particular time. And whatever I do, whatever happens at this time, this is the end of this particular time for this project. Yeah. So and therefore, I'm now going to go into something else that's going to be a bit more, I'm going to relax with, like, I'm going to go see some friends. I'm going to have a good time. I think it's so important that you have restful moments, whatever it is that you're doing, because if you don't engage in sort of bringing in sort of really positive energy around yourself, you're going to suffer. And if you don't take that seriously, then there's no way you're going to grow. And I've learned this from a very, very young age. Obviously, having run this business for the last 15 years, I've had 15 years to develop that.
Sure.
So in everything that I do, I always make sure that I have a start and an end. I also always make sure I have an exit, because it's so important to have an exit.
Yeah.
You with whatever project, because once you know that, okay, fine, that's the doorway, you always feel free. But when you feel like you have this thing that's going to keep going on and on and on and on, then you feel like it's going to, it would never ever stop. You could be at a loss.
Yeah.
So that for me is a very important thing, that you should always maintain some form of beginning and end, so you know exactly what the boundaries are, and maintain that, and then respect it so much.
Yeah. Actually follow through on it, right?
Yeah, follow through and respect your rules as well.
I've been, and I mentioned this, I think maybe in the last podcast interview that I did with one of our guests, but I've been learning how to day trade in the marketplace.
Me too.
Have you really? We might have to share notes after the fact, but
definitely.
But it's been an interesting and at times stressful and learning experience, but ultimately a learning experience. And I'm in a stage now where I'm getting more and more excited, because I see certainly the potential. I mean, I saw the potential a long time ago. My problem is I rushed in. And to your point, I have learned this the hard way, but it's been exhilarating as of even just the last week or so, where I've very intentionally put a set of rules in place, a strategy that I'm reviewing, or that I've reviewed so much that it's just kind of ingrained in my head. And then when I go into to trade these particular funds, I know my rules. I know the things that I should be doing and shouldn't be doing based on experience, based on practice. And having that structure in place has made all the difference in the world. Because before I was just kind of going in, blind and making just terrible decisions at times, and that wasn't helping anybody. So I love this emphasis on the significance of rules, and not just having rules in place, because it's easy to write those down, but then we have to actually follow through on them. And this certainly applies to time management. It makes all the difference in the world. When we talk about time management, outsourcing, delegation, and can be a really important component of better managing time. But I know that not everybody's approach to this is the same. Have you experimented with these concepts? Have you seen any benefit from them?
Outsourcing is definitely a plus. And it doesn't matter whether you're outsourcing to a company or you're outsourcing to a person. I think what I've learned about outsourcing is the fact that you're taking, you're buying more time. We focus so much on money and we forget that actually time is more important than money. Because once you have time, you can do other things.
Yes.
And the thing that you've outsourced is being done at the same time. So it's almost like there are two of you getting something done.
Yeah.
So that for me is so important. I would not preach that any more than it needs to. But I think it's, for anyone who's always thinking, gosh, I need to outsource, I would encourage it. But I think the challenge with outsourcing is finding somebody or something that is able to deliver exactly what it is that needs to be delivered. Not so much what you want, but what needs to be done.
Ooh.
You know what I mean?
I love the differentiation there. Can you explain that? The need versus the want?
Yeah, because your perception of your deliverables is also very different from, say, your client's perception of deliverables. And I think sometimes we get so hung up on expectations that are not essential or required for sort of growth, right? Have you ever heard that phrase that they say it's important to complete? No, sorry, perfect. It's not important to be perfect, but it's important to be for it to be completed. I.e., it's important that you get to a point where you're like, right, we've reached our goals. It's not perfect, but perfection is very subjective, right?
That's true.
So what's perfect to me, or what's not perfect to me may be perfect to you, right? And I think one of the great things about outsourcing is the fact that someone says, hey, I can deliver X, Y, and Z, right? But you may see that X, Y, and Z to you is A, B, C, D, X, Y, Z, right? And so your client or whoever you're delivering to is only looking for X, Y, and Z. And the person who you're outsourcing to is be able to deliver X, Y, and Z. So I think it's so important that you understand that, this is good enough. And therefore you now have more time to move on to the other things, because otherwise you're not going to grow. There's no perfect machine in life.
To me, you represent somebody who, in our industry, certainly is kind of the epitome of an artist type. The way that you look at photography, the way that you think. So I'm curious to get your take on what you feel is. I don't know. To some photographers, they might feel like they're compromising. This idea of good enough is a compromise to their art. It's a compromise to their business. What would your response be to them?
Okay, so this is another thing I say to my mentees, that it's so important that you define exactly what it is you're doing. Are you in this business to be an artist, or are you in this business to make money? Right? Are you in this business to be to be a business person? Because your goals and objectives are very, very different for both. Being a photographer who's running a photography business, I think it's so important that I separate what is my art and what is my product and service. And I think if you don't define those things very clearly, unless it's very gray, you will suffer. It will affect you because you don't know who's showing up each time you're going to work. You don't know who's showing up to whenever you're doing art. You don't know who's showing up when you're doing, you're offering some sort of product or service. And I think that's extremely important that you are able to differentiate both. Otherwise, you're just not going to, like I said, you're not going to survive. It's just going to become, it's like the two-headed monster fighting each other. So I always have this, I know it's a very crude saying. I don't know if it's appropriate to say on this podcast, but you got to define, I shouldn't even say it, but I'll just say it. You got to define who's the mistress and who's the wife. Who's the person that you're saying, okay, fine, I'm doing this because I'm indulging myself, or I'm doing this because I'm indulging somebody else.
Sure. Well, and I think the lack of clarity, and this is a topic that we get into quite a bit on the podcast, the significance of what I refer to as a big picture view. this kind of overarching set of values and goals that drive what I do, if that's not been established, then there's a tendency for photographers, myself included, to kind of go into what they're doing just haphazardly, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and constantly reacting to whatever's in front of them versus saying, this is what I'm, as you pointed out, Jide, what I am trying to accomplish. And as a result, then it makes sense for me to be engaged in this activity. It makes sense for me to and even to our conversation, be okay with a compromise of sorts when it comes to delegation. And of course, this is not just relevant to editing. It could be album design. It could be email management. There is, for the client, what is a great experience. And then there may be a version, which is what we want. We just have to understand the difference and then determine what our overarching set of goals, I guess what that means for the balance between those two things, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, you've said it so much better than I would ever.
Oh, not at all. No, I think the perspective, though, is a really great one that you're highlighting. And I mean, it's a good reminder for me. Whatever business or venture I'm involved in, I need to make sure that I keep at the forefront those goals and let that drive what I'm doing versus getting emotionally tied up in this thing and that thing. And I know that photographers listening in can benefit from this as well. So I appreciate that perspective. I want to jump to the next question, though, about books. Is there a particular book that has been really impactful in the last 2 or 3 years? Maybe you've read it or listened to it or otherwise, that you've seen benefit from in your personal life, maybe your business, or both?
This question is very difficult because there's so many great books that I've read that I can say that has really helped me out. But the main book, I think, that keeps coming back every time I think about it, and I've read it about 3 times, is this very, very famous book by the name of by the title of 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Yes. by Stephen Covey.
Yes.
And what I love so much about it is just how structured he talks about the different 7 habits themselves. And for me, I always realize that whenever I say I'm falling by the wayside or I'm not sort of being effective, and I go back and I look at the fact that I'm like, I'm not being proactive, for instance. Now, maybe that's the problem. Maybe I'm being too reactive. Or maybe I'm not putting the end in mind. I'm just kind of picking out different things that are sort of highlighted in the book. And I find that it's one that is so important to the development of the human person as a person as well, just to be effective in anything. It may not even have to do with business, but just being effective in your marriage. It can be effective in your hobbies or whatnot. So that is a book I would recommend to anyone.
Well, and we'll make sure to link to this in the show notes. It's a bit of a classic at this point, and I think I actually maybe read it quite some time ago, but we'll make sure to link to it. It's on to the book on Amazon. Stephen Covey, as you'd mentioned, and there's something about books like this that one might argue, hey, we can't put too much weight on any one person's opinion about what makes a great life. But I think the reality, at least in some cases, is that an individual hasn't clarified their value set, which then, to our earlier conversation, drives how they behave personally, professionally, and just at least having an outside perspective. Hey, here are some key principles that can make our life better. If you don't have anything else that you're going to subscribe to, that you're beginning to implement in your life, there's opportunity through books like this to at least gain some perspective in order to better establish those values. I've personally found a lot of value, for example, in Tony Robbins' writing, and it's not that he's got it all figured out or that he knows all, but I just found a lot of value in the psychological principles that he shared in his writing, and I've been able to take some of those and apply them to my life in a way that's made a really big difference. I'm continuing to work at implementing those. So I like the kind of perspective that we can gain from these books. We'll make sure to link to that book in the show notes. For everybody listening in, it's Bokeh, Bokeh podcast.com. You can see the show notes there. And in fact, there's also a section on the site called bokehbookshelf.com for everybody listening. And if you go there, you can see some of the most popular book recommendations from our podcasts over the years, and take advantage of that resource. Shout out to Haley for putting that together for us. But I mentioned earlier, Jide, that you've got a Nikon ambassadorship now, which is really, really exciting. Just talk briefly about that. I mean, what is this? What has this felt like to be able to have an opportunity like this?
So when I was told that I was being made or given the title, let's just say, however you want to call it, to of being a Nikon. I say Nikon because I grew up in that part of the world.
Sure.
Ambassador. It was, first of all, I was very taken aback because I wasn't really sure what I was hearing. I thought I was in a dream because it wasn't something I was expecting. But it was amazing, just not because of what it represents, but because of the people that I get to sort of be an ambassador with. Nikon have some of the most amazing people that I could not, I couldn't ever be so delighted to be in a group with them. And just that alone was the first thing. And this is even before this announcement came to pass. These people, all the different Nikon ambassadors have always been sort of, they've always checked up on me. They've always been like really, really good friends because every so often at some of the big conferences I've spoken to represent the brand. So in a sense, you could say, okay, yeah, it was coming, but I never really saw it that way. And when it did happen, I just felt like, oh my God, this is so amazing. And what does it mean sort of being a Nikon ambassador? I think it's such a great feeling knowing that you have a big brand that supports and backs you on everything that you're doing as an artist, and also as a business as well. And it also is a great opportunity for myself to be part of their own vision as well. So there's so many exciting things that I'm looking forward to because of that announcement.
Wow. I mean, it's such an incredible opportunity. I shot Nikon for the 10 or 11 years that I photographed weddings. So I'm a huge fan of the brand. I still think to this day that the ergonomics on and the layout of the buttons on the Nikon cameras are still some of the best, if not the best. Of course, very subjective, but I just love the platform. So I'm really stoked for you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Your artisanship, I feel like warrants this kind of representation. So it's exciting to see that additional leverage that you have and hopefully further opportunities representing Nikon to be able to share not only your art, but your perspective on how you develop that. I have to congratulate you on that. It's really, really exciting.
Thanks a lot, Nathan. It means a lot.
Absolutely. No, I'm stoked for you. Well, to my point actually about your artisanship and your perspective and your skill set for that matter. I want to get into how you go about capturing these in-between moments. And this is a topic that you touched on at the Cookout conference, I think a couple of years ago. And you have such an interesting perspective on it. And I'd be curious, actually, before we get into the technical side of things, what is it about these in-between moments that fascinates you, that you so enjoy trying to capture?
Right. Transition moments. So basically, So I noticed that over time, that every time I photographed a wedding, I sort of went into a very repetitive mode. And also my expectations were very, very, very similar. I would always see a wedding the same exact way. And therefore, almost without even looking through the camera, I would know how to shoot them. And it became extremely repetitive and nothing very interesting. I think what was it now? I was speaking to Davini and Daniel some years ago about their own wedding photography, and they managed to sort of open my eyes to the idea of like, hey, do you notice that most of the really interesting photos always happen when things have not been scripted, and most of that time is usually sort of in transition, sort of in between those moments.
Yeah.
I was like, what do you mean? It's like, well, think about it. If let's say a bride or a groom is walking into a church, you know exactly what's going to happen, right? They're going to walk down the aisle, get to the front of the aisle, to the altar, and the ceremony happens, right? That's kind of expected.
Mm-hmm.
And so therefore you go into this frame of mind of creating the same sort of photographs when you're in that, during that portion of, say, wedding ceremony. So you always go to the same places, you always go to the same locations and all that kind of stuff and viewpoints. But it says, but imagine after or before that particular time, the transition from, say, when they're getting ready to the ceremony, that is never ever scripted. That is never something that has kind of been planned. That's always when things generally tend to happen that you don't expect. So let's say after the ceremony, the couple go into some room and they do something, because they're not sort of following a script. They tend to be themselves.
Yeah.
And therefore, you will find some very unique moments happening there. If anything, that is the time you need to open your eyes and open your ears attentively, because you're going to see some very, very interesting things. You know, you get all the heavy emotion, the hugs, the kisses, because people are behind closed doors. So that's what's kind of driven me now to, you know, search for these moments, because it's very, very similar to when you're, say, documenting an event or even non-event as a journalist. You're always looking for the things that define the people that you're photographing, but define the moment that they're in. So, and these things tend to happen when people are sort of being themselves and they're not sort of following a script. And they're the most interesting ones, because for the viewer, when they're looking at the photos, they're thinking, okay, yeah, these are wedding photos, but this is not what I'm used to seeing. This is very different, and I'm now interested. And so that really piqued my interest and got me in search of those moments. Another thing, everyone has a camera these days, right?
Yeah.
Everyone's taking photographs. So they're all going to take the same photos all the time. Wouldn't it be so much better if you let them take those photos and you had something extra in your arsenal and were seeking for the photos that people were not taking? And that for me is really the sort of the whole sort of basis of searching for in-between moments. And as a result of that, it's kind of made my work look quite different. You know, because then it's like, you know, people even say to me, people say sometimes to me like, oh, I wonder what Jide is going to capture this time, you know, because he's always capturing these very, very, very different things that we don't normally see, but they're always really interesting.
Well, and the nuance lies in the split second. I remember during that conference, you were talking about, I think there was a particular shot you were walking us through and literally showing us kind of all the raw images and then the final image that you chose from it. But it was, I think, a bride that was sitting in a car or getting ready to get out of the car or something like that. And you said, here's this image and then this image, and then here's the image that I chose, and then here are a couple of the images after, that kind of thing. But it was really interesting to see the significance of that detail. And of course, ultimately your perspective on the nuance of that, those few seconds, as that subject was in front of you. Joe Busink, who was actually a Nikon ambassador at one point as well, he's a photographer that I used to follow when I was coming up. One of the things that he would do, kind of famously at this point, was to have a second shooter, not to be what we would normally think of as a second shooter, but to focus on capturing the formal portraits, for example, so that he could focus on these other details that you're describing.
Right.
Is that something that you do, or if not, how do you balance making sure that you know your clients are getting the kind of standard images that they may be expecting while also being able to capture these moments?
So I think two things. I mean, first of all, Joe is one of my heroes. He's such an amazing photographer. One of the things that I have learned, I mean, when I started my photography journey, I started in the UK, and over there we don't have well, initially we didn't. The concept of a second shooter was very, very foreign. It was more of an American thing.
Okay.
And then I wasn't sort of doing this the way I'm doing it now. But what I come to do, or I've come to realize, is I became very used to photographing, you know, the things that I need to photograph. So what I do now is I split my photographic time into sections. So I would say, okay, fine, the ceremony is going to last for, let's say, 30 minutes. In that 30 minutes, I need to photograph, say, 30% or let's say 50, 60% of the standard stuff that I'm expected to photograph. And then the remaining, say, 30, 20% or whatever it is, I'm going to use it to photograph the things that are unique. And therefore, I'm going to have to spend some time looking for those things. So I sometimes time myself. So say if I caught the main bits of the ceremony, I would then now say, okay, fine, I have 5 minutes to look for something interesting. I'm going to sort of hog this location over here for 5 minutes and capture this thing.
Yeah.
Because I notice now that you can capture as many photographs as you want or as you need, but if the photo wasn't captured, it never existed. That's the way I see it. So I think I've gotten to the point where, like I said, you can almost for sure predict some of the things that are going to happen. But the things that you can't predict, you need to give yourself enough time. You need to give yourself enough leeway in sort of trying to capture those things. So it's all about balancing time. Like I said initially, I always try and make sure I have a beginning and an end. So if I don't capture anything in that 5 minutes, I just let it go and I move on to the next thing. Because I always remember that, or you always remember that if it's a wedding, you're going to have about 8-9 hours anyway to photograph the whole entire thing. In that time, you're probably looking for 10 really strong photographs. In 8-9 hours, I'm sure you can find that. If you just allocate, say, 5-10 minutes, that's about an hour to an hour and a half of the day. That's quite a lot of time. So it's all about just sort of planning and balancing things appropriately.
And what enables that ultimately is intentionality. This has been a theme in our conversation. And I really love this because I've certainly personally seen the value of it in my life. And I know that our listeners can also find a similar value. If we know what we're trying to accomplish, then we can plan accordingly. And to your point about the ceremony, for example, you've got 30 minutes, so that you're going to allocate this much time to the typical images, and then you're going to allocate this much time or this percentage of the time to those nuances, the details, the things that look particularly interesting or might be unique to that particular client or that particular environment. But there's intentionality behind it. That's what enables it. And I'm sure there's some element. I guess I shouldn't assume, but Jide, I'm assuming that there is some element of like kind of going with the flow in the moment. You happen to see something, you're ready, you're aware, you're able to capture it. But then there's a certain amount of reward, I think, that comes to those who are intentional in planning as well.
Yeah. I mean, it's very. I mean, there's so many things I've learned just over the years and you can liken this to many other forms of life, having some sort of plan, but then also having intention about exactly what you're after. One of the things I also teach my students is go in with a plan. Always go into your wedding with a plan. And I didn't realize that I always did this until when I started trading and stuff like that. But I have a very detailed plan of the kind of pictures that I want to get. And this really came about because, when I'm doing my post-production or I'm doing my culling or I'm trying to put together a story or a slideshow, I search for certain photos. And also when I spoke to, Davini and Daniel, they would tell me, oh yeah, we would look for a certain number of photos in this area. We'd look for certain photos in this area. And it's almost like you have an intention of every single thing you're looking for. It's like you're creating this piece. Because when you are then now going to create, say, the album, you need to be able to have the images that you need.
Well, I can't thank you enough for highlighting the significance of intentionality again today. And your work is certainly a reflection of this thought process. We're going to make sure to link to that in the show notes. But before we go, a question for you. If you had to pick 3, and maybe you've already touched on some of these in our conversation, but if you had to pick 3 of the most important concepts to share with our listeners about how to most effectively capture these split second, the in-between, the transition moments, what would those principles be?
So the first one would definitely be, like I said, to plan. Make sure that you have some sort of detailed script or idea of the things that you need. And make sure that before you go in, you've already sort of worked out where you're going to get these things. The next thing, which kind of feeds into that, is to listen. And listen to not only what, in the case of a wedding, listen to what your clients are looking for. It's very important that you find that out from at the very beginning. And I think a lot of photographers just sort of walk into a wedding and start taking photographs that they think their clients want. But just kind of making sure that you understand what's important to them. And then also just listening throughout the day is also very, very, very important. Having the empathy to put yourself, in their own shoes. Empathy is extremely important when capturing moments and capturing a good story. Yeah. You've got to feel what they're feeling and understand how they feel, because that would even make your pictures even stronger and know exactly what you're looking for.
For sure.
And then the last thing is have very sort of heightened curiosity. And again, this kind of links into the previous one again. just keep exploring. Find out about the people that you're photographing. What makes them tick? Who are they? Why are they? How are they, as it were? The more you understand about them, and the more you understand their stories, the better your compositions will be. For example, now there might be an uncle who keeps coming to the bride every single time something happens. The bride is always smiling at her all the time, at him all the time. And you're thinking, what's going on over here?
Yeah.
You capture a really strong moment. And then later on, you find out that, oh, yeah, he was the guy who raised me when I was a kid.
Wow.
And we always talked about my wedding day.
Yep.
And now he's here to, watch me get married. And yeah, but he's also a very shy guy, which is why he's always running away from the camera or something like that.
Yes.
And it's interesting. You may capture a really interesting composition that shows a connection between both of them, where it's not overly, should I say, screaming at you that this was what was actually happening.
Right.
But to them, it means the entire world. And that just comes just from exploring and just being curious.
I love that. And I think it's a brilliant way to sum up our conversation, because it really is at the root of the very beginning of our conversation about conversation, not so ironically, the significance of curiosity. If we can bring that curiosity to our relationships, and more specifically conversations, and we can bring that curiosity to our photography, we're going to be in a much, much better place for it. And you're a wonderful example of both of these principles. I think it's really, really wonderful that we've had the opportunity to be able to hear your perspective, get your advice. And for everybody listening in, I want you to be able to see Jide's work. Jide, I know that you've got like 3 different Instagram accounts.
Right.
Can you mention what social media our listeners should go to, as well as your website, so they can follow along?
Yeah, I'm such a social media hugger, which is interesting because I'm hardly ever on there. So I actually sort of have 2 main Instagram pages that I use. One represents my business and one represents my artistic, or should I say my personal work.
Yes.
So the business is it's basically my last name studio. So it's Alakija Studios, Alakija Studios.
Yes.
And my personal one is just my last name, Alakija. So you can kind of see what I'm usually up to, or the kind of things that I photograph on one, and then the other one just kind of shows essentially the things that I want to share with my prospects and my clients. My webpage kind of follows pretty much the same thing. Actually, no, my webpage, there are 2 webpages as well. So my webpage, again, my last name, alakija.com, and that's my commercial webpage. And then my personal page is actually my first name and my last name. So it's jidealakija.com, JIDEALAKI.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and I'm actually making that note right now, because I didn't realize that there was that additional website. So this is going to be good. I'm going to have to jump over there. And I was already following you on your, actually it was your personal Instagram account, it looks like, but I'm going to have to follow these other 2 accounts as well.
Right. Yes. You. So I think you're on my private Instagram account, which is one where I just put photographs. I'm such a narcissist in that one. I just put photographs of myself. It's just.
Well, we'll link to these that you mentioned in the show notes. I'm also going to make sure that we link to the ambassadorship page on Nikon's website. We'll link to your art company as well, and just to kind of give further example of your work. There was a particular shoot in Aruba, an engagement session in Aruba that I had pulled up earlier before our conversation. There's just some beautiful, beautiful work in that.
Oh man, thank you.
Yeah, we'll link to that specific session too, just to give further example of your work for our listeners. I really appreciate you making time for all of us today. Thanks for sharing your perspective with all of us.
Thanks, man. Thanks. This has been great. I've quite enjoyed this, actually.
Thanks so much, photographers, for listening to the Bokeh Podcast. Will you let us know what you thought of the show by leaving a review of the podcast in the Apple Podcast app? And I'd love to hear from you personally with your thoughts about the podcast and suggestions about future topics and guests for the show. My email is nathan@bokehpodcast.com. We do try to bring this show to you commercial free, so make sure to check out our sponsors, photographersedit.com and Miilu, MIILU.com. Photographer's Edit is custom photo editing for the professional photographer, and Milu is the simplest way to create and manage timelines and shot lists for the events you're photographing.